All right. So the next thing that I'm going to show you that Terry demoed this morning in the advanced class was something I'm building for another group. They have a project where I'm using Shazam to show and hide multiple groups of fields depending on how many samples they collect. And within one of their samples, they have a value which is like an RNA integrity value, I believe. And they wanted to be able to show a label based on the value of that field. So they wanted to show that, like, if it was 6.9 and below, they wanted to show that it was bad. And if it was 7.0 up to 10, they wanted to show that it was good. And so what I did, I was having a problem with this field. So let me go to let me add a record, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So here's the group of fields that they start out with, and then whenever they have, so this is for a sample collection, and once they have these samples, they create aliquots. And so I'm just going to go with one aliquot here, and then they also have me dynamically generating their sample name based on some piping. But here's the field that I'm talking about, this RIN field. And I was originally just going to try to do it with branching logic, where I had a label that just said RIN good and RIN bad. And based on the value that I put in this field, it was going to show or hide one of those fields with branching logic. The problem that I ran into was that it worked fine for the good. If I set the value at 7 to 10, it worked fine. But regardless of whether I put a value in this field, the RIN bad label would appear all the time by default. And I thought, well, maybe it's because I'm setting minimum and maximum values for this field, and it's, minimum is 0, so it's putting a 0 in there automatically if it's blank, but that wasn't the case. Even if it was empty, and I used the console log to try to pop out this value to see what's actually being put in, even when it was blank, the branching logic would show this value of RIN bad. And I even tried to update the branching logic to say, okay, well, instead of just being less than or equal to 6.9, if I say that it's greater than or equal to 0 and less than or equal to 6.9 to try to give it a range, well, maybe then it would pick up that it was blank. But that didn't solve the problem either. So then I decided that...
Wait. So one of the key things here, just to make sure everybody's clear, is he needs to show good if it's 7 or less, is that right? And
good if it's 7 or greater, and bad if it's 6.9 and below. Yep.
Yeah, so it's below 7. So just make sure that we're clear about that. So go ahead.
Right. So since I'm already using Shazam for this project, Shazam gives you an editor for HTML, there's another editor for CSS, and there's another editor for JavaScript. So I had another project that I worked on where I had to mimic the multilingual functionality by showing and hiding labels based on values using JavaScript, and I figured I could try to use that here. And it's similar, but it's different. It's really different. So let me show you what this does by entering a value now. So if I say that the value of this RIN was 8.5, now I can dynamically change this field label and color. Instead of having a separate field using branching logic, now it's the same field, It's the same table data or same table column or same field. And what I'm doing is I'm just showing or hiding whichever table element I want to display and hiding the others. So if I say that it was 3.0, it goes back to bad. But if I delete this, it goes back to its default. So this solved the problem, partially. The issue that I had was the code that I created changes this label when this value is changed. So it updates the label. Well, the problem was this doesn't persist. This isn't stored anywhere. So when I saved this value and went back to the record, this label styling was gone. The value was still the same here, but the styling was gone. So I had to solve that problem as well. So now if I put in this value and save it, it reloads the window, but that value is still there. And even if I left and went back, it's still there. So let me show you what I've done. And this is the Shazam setup. And it might be hard to see here. So let me go to, so here's the JavaScript tab, here's the CSS tab I was talking about, and here's the HTML. But let me show you in my editor, which gives me a little bit more styling so you can see stuff easier. What I'm doing is I'm taking this, within this table row, I have these fields. And the way this record is created, so let me go back to the record to show you. Basically, these labels here are all part of one table row. And these values, these fields down here are part of another table row. So I'm saying based on this value here, update this cell in this table row. So this is that table row. And you can see here that this is the RNA isolation notes label, and then here's a concentration label, and here's the units label. This is where I'm doing all of this styling. So I create a table cell that says when this is the default. So that gives the same styling and coloring and everything. And then it just says RIN. And then I have another table cell that for the good value that says RIN good, has a different background color. And then I have another one for RIN bad. Now I can't display all these at the same time because what it does is it pushes these other table data cells out of the way. So I'm only showing this one by default. And you can see here that I have the display set to none for the good and the bad by default. So when this page loads, this one shows up by default and these are hidden. Now in the JavaScript, what I'm doing here, this is for the change, to change the label. So what I'm doing is I'm passing an input, and I'm saying that this field is named RIN, and I can find that. I really like using the inspect tab, like you guys probably haven't noticed. But it's a way for you to reference fields that you normally don't think you have access to. So this value, I don't know if you can see it, it won't let me highlight it. Oh, there we go. It's saying that this input has a name of RIN, instead of me having to do this weird input # val dash da 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 da. I can say look through the HTML, find an input with the name of RIN, and when that changes, fire this function. Now what I'm doing is I'm passing this value because I'm grabbing the same input, and I'm getting the value and I'm putting it in a variable. It just makes it easier to handle. So now what I'm saying is, now that I've assigned this to a variable, I'm saying I can't say that if it's null or not, but I can check the length, and if the length is 0, meaning there's no value in it, because I want to say if it has a length, meaning that it's greater than 0, but that it's greater than or equal to 7, I want you to hide the default, show the good, and hide the bad. And in the HTML, I've set IDs for each one of these. So this ID is rin default, this ID here is rin good, and this ID is rin bad. So I'm referring to the ID here in JavaScript. So I'm saying give me the table data cell, hide this one, show this one, hide this one. And then I'm saying if these conditions aren't met, check it for these conditions. So if it has a value, but that value is less than or equal to 6.9, I want you to hide the default, hide the good, and show the bad. And finally, if the length is 0, meaning it's empty, or if it's greater than 10, because the min and max are 0 and 10. So if it's greater than 10, I want you to show the default and then hide the good and hide the bad. And so this chunk of code is for the dynamic update of this. So that's what makes it, and if I say that this is 11, REDCap's going to give me an error, and then when I go back, it's going to give me an error because I didn't put a decimal place. Interesting. I broke it. So let's see. Let's go back to 6.9. There we go. So that's the code that does it dynamically. There, and then now the code that keeps it there is up here. And basically, I'm doing this on the window on load function. So when the window loads, I'm getting that value from this field. This is just for my own sanity. This outputs to the console log here when it updates. And you can see here. So now that's 6.9. So if I change this to 7.3 and reload, you'll see that it updates to 7.3. That just shows me that I'm grabbing the value where I think I'm grabbing the value. And I'm doing the same sort of functions, although I have to display it differently. Whereas here, I'm showing and hiding. What I'm doing here is I'm actually adding a CSS rule. I'm appending that onto the rule that I have here already. Because this one is displayed as table cell, this one is displayed as none, and this one is displayed as none. So what I have to do when this loads is I can't just, because I can't say, if it's displayed as none, I can't change that. Or I can't just show and hide. I have to change the actual value of the rule here from none to table cell. So what I'm doing here is same thing. If it's good, I'm changing the rule for the display to none. For the good, I'm changing it to table cell, and then for the bad, I'm changing it to none. And if it's bad, I'm changing the other ones to none and the bad one to table cell. And then if for the default, I'm just changing it to table cell. And this is the code I had to generate in order to make this persist when you entered this and went out of the record. So even if we went into like add a new record, and I'll just add one real quick. Then we go back to the dashboard and I go back into the first record, that value should still be there. And so this is really just, I mean, it's kind of an elegant way of giving a visual indicator of whether this sample is good or bad and whether they can use it or not. And so instead of them having to scroll through and look for this number, they immediately can see whether it's good or bad based on the label for that field. So does anybody have any questions or do you want me to explain anything further?
Once again, I just want to make sure you and us, we all understand that this is very advanced. And part of why I wanted this demoed was, one, to see the possibilities of the coding, but also for you to see how he has set up this instrument and the fields and the possibilities for collections of samples. I mean, things that, may seem kind of clunky in a regular form are sort of resolved using Shazam, and then he takes it further and really does all kinds of fun things with the labels and whatever. But there's no expectation at this point for you to understand all of this. That's why we're recording it, and we'll post it and give you whatever tools that you need to be able to do something like this. But it does show you what is possible. So I hope you enjoyed seeing this. His manual getting erased. This is awesome. It is awesome, which is why I wanted him to show this. I was afraid it was slightly premature because it wasn't quite ready yesterday. And I did show in my advanced class just the view, because you think of REDCap being so linear, so vertical generally, but to be able to see how he has structured this instrument and used branching logic and Shazam and all that, it really is very powerful as far as I'm concerned. So if you decide you want to do something like this and you want some help, reach out to us. We're certainly willing to help you get to this kind of instrument and this kind of design. So
and another thing, Terry, just to touch on what you had said earlier about the important attribute for the rules, that's another nice thing, is that here, I don't know if you notice, but the colors for the labels are staying there and not being overridden by this green highlight that REDCap puts in. And the way I'm doing that is just by having the important set for the background color for the labels. So I'm overriding this green highlight because there's a class in REDCap that anytime you're on a field, it highlights green for everything. And so now I'm able to keep those labels the colors I want so they don't get lost just by using that important attribute.
And notice that when we're looking at this view right here, that one of the things that I've always considered kind of important when we were building using Shazam is to ensure that you capture the history and comments bubble. So when Manuel was working on that, he had made sure that he figured out how to keep those visible, because it's easy to have them disappear. So if you're working with a project and you're seeing some of your bubbles disappear, except for the project that he demoed right before that with the embedded radio buttons, which is different. That's a trade-off than we agreed, that hiding those or not having those bubbles available was okay, at least at this point, for that particular project, because we do have a log that shows basically the same information. You just have to search for it a little bit more rather than having it right there at your fingertips for the field. However, I think he's going to show you in his code here how you ensure that those bubbles stay present.
Right. So when you use the Shazam module, for every table data cell, you add this class of Shazam, and that's just to show. That's just so REDCap knows that this is the Shazam field. But if you want to have those Shazam icons, you add the additional class of Shazam-icons to all these. Now, if it's a field label, it doesn't matter. Like, so you can see here for this RIN field label, I'm adding the Shazam icons, and now there aren't any Shazam icons for, labels, but REDCap just ignores those, so it's not going to add them. I just do it by default. I put it on everything, so that way I don't have to think about if I missed one. And that's how REDCap knows to put these history and comment buttons back in there when you're using Shazam.
So, does anyone have any questions or comments? Can you see the design view? Yeah, that's a good question. Can you show them the design view, Manny?
Sure. So for the Shazam, everything is just its own separate field. Like you would build it like you would normally build a regular field in Shazam or in REDCap. And the only thing that I'm doing is I have this as a descriptive text, and it's blank, and I have it as Shazam_section, and then I have this one is the subsection, and it's blank. And you just create those for every Shazam group of Shazam fields you want. And so for mine, let me get back up to the Shazam setup. What I'm doing is I have one section which is like the sample collection area, and so I have to have the HTML in here for that first group, that kind of pink field group. And then I have a subsection here for the sample, and then it has its own HTML. And the reason I split that up is because for the project I'm working on, I'm actually going to have 12 of these subsections, because each of these, let me go back to the design here. Each of these Shazam subsections, you can see here that I have branching logic on this field, and I've already got it coded for the 12 that I'm going to create. I'm going to have one of these for each sample. It's going to be subsection 1, 2, 3, all the way to 12. And I'm going to show or hide that based on however many samples the person has collected, which is this field up here. It's in the this one. So if somebody says they collected 12 of those little blue boxes are going to pop up one for each sample. And so that way you're not having to see all 12 of them, and you're only going to see the ones that for the samples that you've created. So this is the first section here, and then this is the subsection, and then this would be copied for every one of those, and they would each have their own. And every time so I would have to create 12 duplicates of all these cells, or all these fields rather, in the designer. So this cell condition is like cell condition _1, and then I'd have cell condition _2, and 3, and 4, and 5, all the way down to 12. I'd have 12 copies of all these fields, so that way when I create the HTML, when I create the HTML, I can put those fields in their own separate subsection, and then show and hide them based on that.
And you've all probably done something like that where you have had a field where maybe you had a number in there and you had a drop down. We've demoed this in the past in classes where if you put in 1, 2, 3, it automatically opens through branching logic stuff below it. So it's the same kind of thing, only a little more complicated here when you're doing this with Shazam, but it's the same concept. All right. So if there's nothing else, we've hit the hour, which is really nice. This was a great session today. So thank you all for being here. And again, we're tentatively planning on doing a session next week, even though it's right before the holiday. Unless we make a decision otherwise, and if we do, we'll post it. We will have a session next week. So thanks for attending, and I'll go ahead and end the session. Thanks very much, and have a nice holiday if I don't get to talk to you before.